Hello, I'm Paul Gates. Welcome to this week's episode of The Academics. Joining me today are our regular panelists, Professor Heather Page Preston and Dr. Dave Spiceland. The topics we're planning on covering today are the Constitution in the current climate, the social climate from the world to campus, and the No Hate App State campaign. We have signs around campus about that. So let's start with the Constitution. We of course just finished Constitution Week last week. Had events on campus, several kinds. Reading the Constitution, that was a good deal of fun on Wednesday. It was nice weather. But the Constitution never goes away as far as a topic, and we hear more about it probably recently than normally. What do we make of this? What are we talking about? What's in the conversation about the Constitution?
Oh, I think it's free speech is the thing that I hear a lot, particularly with yesterday's NFL protests.
Mm-hmm.
So, free speech. Who has the right to say what, when, and where, and how?
Well, who does?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll throw that back to you. You're an expert on the Constitution.
Well, I always say in a class that free speech belongs to everybody. It's not for, of course, the point of it is to avoid the government setting the tone or restricting the discussion. The idea that the marketplace should be open and it informs people so that they understand political issues, social issues, and then vote accordingly.
But there are some things that are not guaranteed, right?
Oh, no, free speech is not absolute.
Yeah.
No, Dave, that's
Exactly.
Yeah.
We know that.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't falsely yell fire in a crowded
No,
theater.
that's true. Yeah.
If it really is a fire,
Yell it.
we hope you do yell it.
Yeah.
Or just sneak out in the back and
But that what that speaks to is the idea that it's circumstances that dictate whether speech is appropriate or not. If it's false, cry of fire, you're in trouble.
well, it's the marketplace of ideas, which is what you're referring to. That if we are free to talk about issues and have some give and take and whatever, then hopefully as a society we can come to some good conclusions.
That's a nice thought. What about hate speech?
Well, there is no definition of hate speech. First of all,
Okay.
The court has had a terrible time trying to define it, and there have been efforts made certainly, but it's one man's meat is another man's poison kind of thing. One person's hate speech is another's strong opinion.
Is that different from inciting violence, a call to violence? There's a distinction there?
That is the dividing
Okay.
line when you
Okay.
get to incitement.
Okay.
Incitement is the bright line. Yes, right.
Okay.
But as far as staying on the speech side of that line, it's an open field. There has been no successful definition of hate speech.
Or the Minneapolis case where Scalia had written this opinion that, when you look at it, is kind of it's very interesting the way he put it. But it seems like initially at some point the Supreme Court threw out hate speech. We still hear that term. And there is something, it's kind of like what Potter Stewart said, I know obscenity when I see it, and I know hate speech when I hear it, but that's a very personal thing.
Sure, it's in the eye of the beholder, or the ear of the beholder, as it were, and that's part of what makes it difficult. There's not a fixed star that you can point to. It's a movable goal, or not goal, but a movable standard that doesn't apply across the board.
So what about the banner that was put up right as classes were starting? The Identity Europa banner. Where does that fall in this discussion?
Well, for something to be a threat, what's called a true threat nowadays, it has to be directed at an individual.
Okay.
And it would have to be a reasonable belief that there was danger involved in that threat. Not a banner hanging off the bridge in the middle of the night, which apparently was the case.
Mm-hmm.
But something else about that I have heard, and I wondered maybe if you two had any light to shed on this, is I've heard that it was photoshopped, that photo, which I have seen.
Yeah, I've seen the photo.
photo.
I've seen the photo.
And there was some talk among our colleagues that perhaps that was the case.
I have not heard anything about that.
Have you heard?
The question for me is, who did this?
Mm-hmm.
People who do things in the dead of night and don't have the, I'll use the term, the guts to confront people with their opinions as atrocious as they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the history to all this? And that's my question.
Well, it's a real organization, apparently. I mean, I've read about it quite a bit.
3, 4 people, or what?
Well,
larger
more
than that, yeah.
It's actually a fairly, you could call it a movement, I think. Yeah, it's the same issue, dead of night. And we had that with the chalking last spring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the people who did the chalking things that led to some uproar on campus. That's yeah, that was anonymously done in the dead of night. I mean, they posted their chalking, doing it on Facebook, but of course they pixelated their own faces.
And again, I'm curious, who are they? I don't know. I really don't.
We don't know. No, I mean, we don't know whether they're students or whether they were, but they were, I mean, it was racist speech.
Yes, yeah.
It was the topic, but
And even though
no,
it's-
we don't know who they were.
Yeah, and even though it's not directed at an individual, it does create a terrible feeling where it occurs. And it's also much more threatening to people who have historically been forced to deal with those messages.
Sure.
I mean, we all sit here enjoying white privilege at the moment. It's very different for someone of color who's grown up in a society that's not fond of people of color, primarily.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if
you
it's
know.
another example of something they've experienced
Yes.
over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, messages can be tailored to target people who would have a negative reaction. The idea of a climate that is unwelcoming, sure, that is very uncomfortable.
Well,
that's what
when you look at Nazi Germany, and I've studied the rise of Hitler, and a lot of, I mean, that's how he did it and what was done. You know, you hear the phrase "never again," and I agree with that. You know, so what do we do to avoid people who would take away our rights, left wing, right wing, or whatever? And that freedom of speech to where we can indeed speak our mind. There's a picture that I've seen on the internet, and supposedly it's a real guy, where you see this crowd of people doing the Nazi salute, and there's one guy with his arms folded, and it says, "Be this guy." Now,
I've seen
from what
that.
I understand, though, this guy suffered as a result of that.
I'm sure he did.
And, you know, what do we do to where we have the freedom to speak without being stifled?
Yeah, at the same time, we're trying to establish a workable society. You know, we're trying to. I mean, everything is a compromise. Political debate is always from two directions, and we hope that eventually we're going to end up at some reasonable midpoint.
Here's my viewpoint, though. There is a big difference between people who gather and want to sing, you know, the Coca-Cola theme song, Teach the World to Sing, and be all love and happiness, as opposed to a group of people who want to get together and throw Nazi salutes and talk about white supremacy. There's a huge difference in that message.
Don't even black
And
supremacy. It's all wrong.
One leads you down a path of destruction rather quickly in a society that, if you want to get along, that's not going to happen. I think the vast majority of us don't want that life, don't want that world. And here's the other thing, free speech. They hung it on a university-owned bridge across River Street. There's a time and a place for it as well. Yes, you have the right to gather. You have to get a permit. You have to be in a location that allows that. And you know, so if you want to play by those rules, fine. Come and talk. I don't have to go. In fact, as a PR person, I would suggest everybody stay home.
But
That message falls on deaf ears.
here's a concern,
Yep.
and I agree that that kind of speech, that kind of movement is wrong. But when we give some publicity to those kinds of wackos out there, I'm thinking about Skokie, and there's a wonderful movie, by the way, with Danny Kaye and how all that worked out back in Skokie, Illinois, so many years ago. And it was the Nazi party, neo-Nazis trying to get the permission to march in a very Jewish community, people who had suffered from the Holocaust. And then finally, at some point, they got the permission, and the ACLU helped them with that permission.
That's right.
And then the whole thing became moot when they said, we're not going to march. And apparently, the people who were planning this said, we made our point. People knew more about us, which is scary in and of itself. So that's a concern I've got, that do you publicize people who are doing these kinds of evils, or do you, it's kind of like the skunk that comes in the tent.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, right? News is supposed to report news. News is change. When you change from the status quo of everybody should get along to hateful messages, of course it's going to be covered. That's not the same as traditional publicity, where you have someone trying to generate news for you, right? In this case, the news media willingly goes out to cover it.
Oh, they love it.
And yeah, so
Those
it's
kind of
publicity by virtue of doing our jobs.
Well, the Skokie March, I mean, this is 1978. This is 40 years ago. Was a peaceful event to the extent that it even was an event. But I think we have to fast forward here to Charlottesville, and when it was not peaceful.
No.
And it was, the intent was not just to display Nazi regalia and Klan uniforms and things like that, but it was to provoke.
It was to provoke. You had people showing up with sidearms.
Show up armed.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
But I'm just curious, how did they hear about each other? I mean, was this a spontaneous event where people got together, which I don't think it was?
No, it was
It
organized.
was an organized effort.
Yes, I think so. I mean, the torch, everybody with the torches the night
Yes.
before,
Yeah.
and then the violence that actually occurred on Saturday afternoon. Yes, it was very much orchestrated. Well, to go back to mention the Constitution again, the press has been demonized.
It has.
Repeatedly by Trump, but we don't see that kind of passion in denouncing the Klan or the Nazis. Why is that? What are we doing here? We had the speech the other night in Alabama, where, of course, now we're talking about the NFL protests. And Trump's denigrating the players who take a knee for the anthem. Suggest that they fire the son of a bitch who does that, and that's his phrase. Questions their patriotism and even their right to protest. I mean, where are we headed with this?
I don't know. We discussed it in class today in Mass Media and Society.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Yeah, we did. It was an interesting discussion. Had 2 sections, and people fell all along the line of this. And I asked, I said, this is a safe place. How do you feel about it? Because it's the place you start, right? It's very personal. And then you try to connect it with the much larger concepts and give background information to help people think through the process. And what came out of this discussion was a lot of really good information, most of which I knew, but a little bit of it I didn't. And I love it that I get to learn too. I always say that I learn as much as they do. It's just from a different perspective. What came out of that was a real sense of at first, a feeling of disrespecting the flag. And I said, okay, do you have a t-shirt with a flag on it? That goes against the codes of display of the U.S. flag. If you have paperware at your 4th of July picnic that has the flag printed on it, that violates code 10 point whatever it is in the display of the flag. The fact that they carry it out on the field at halftime or Super Bowl halftime or at the beginning of game and display it horizontally violates the code of display. So let's really understand disrespect before we start pointing fingers. or before you get too upset about it. You have to look at yourself first and foremost, and then look at the people around you. How much do you really know? How much do you understand? Then out of this discussion came the fact that the players, it's a business. It's a terrible money cycle, right?
Sure.
You are paid by someone. You sign a contract that says, I will not wear certain things, I will not do certain things. And so therefore it's like the Duck Dynasty controversy. You're being paid by a network to perform. And are you being paid by an owner to perform, essentially? This is not a personal choice at that moment. Out of that came a different organizational perspective. The Seattle Seahawks, the entire team, issued a joint statement about what they were going to do and weren't going to do and what they believed in. And so the organization was very accepting of their personal views, because you can't remove the people. It's the people that make up the NFL. So where do you draw that line? Well, the more information you get, the better you can discuss this. I don't know about you guys, but I learned today that starting in 2009, the Department of Defense paid the NFL a lot of money to have players come out and stand during the national anthem in order to show patriotism, to essentially drum up patriotism. It isn't a true honoring of vets, it's a paid performance. And that changes the way that I think about things when I hear information like that. And I checked that in 4 different places today. So yeah, it was interesting, really interesting.
It's a private company, and if the boss says, apparently Jerry Jones of the Cowboys
He did.
has said, you know, you're not going to kneel for the national anthem. I mean, that's his right to do that. Now, whether they follow his rule, who knows? But as far as a free speech issue, it's a private company, and you know, if they don't like it, they don't have to work for that company and make the millions of dollars that they do.
I take a little bit of a different perspective.
The individual teams can take that perspective.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But when Trump is intervening and
This
you know,
is-
suggesting that this action be taken against a protesting player, and you do have to wonder, is this really about the flag and the military? I don't think so. It seems to be a device to divide, or an excuse to divide. And, you know,
Well, it sounds like he went off prompter. You know, I don't know if it was.
Sure.
And I wish there's times he would shut up. And you know, I won't reveal my politics, not too hard there, but I'm not a defender of Trump. You know.
The knock-on effect for me, to bring it back to campus, is, you know, what do our students think? What are they hearing? What the voices on campus that are talking about the No Hate App State signs? That it's not, you know, I'm also a PR person. It's not just enough to have a lovely little catchy phrase to set a tone on campus. And, you know, what's actually being done to create a welcoming climate for marginalized, traditionally marginalized audiences versus just talking about it.
Well, but
we've got to move to our next topic, which is
I thought that was the next topic.
Yeah, I thought that was.
Well, that was 2 topics combined.
Sorry.
Wasn't that clever? Our last topic, to come back to campus a little bit, is the No Hate App State stickers. Is this effective? I mean, I got mine actually directly from the chancellor.
Yeah.
I was at an event and where she was handing them out, and I thought, this is pretty good. This is pretty clever.
Okay, but
what do you hear?
it depends on how you define hate. If you happen to be against same-sex marriage and you express that, you are labeled as hateful, hate speech, and a person is expressing their opinion about something which, by the way, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama felt that way, you know, before elections back in 2008. So how do you define hate is the real issue.
Here's I think a way to look at it. How do you, if you are in disagreement with a particular issue, and somebody expresses that, how do you counter that? Do you shout them down? How do you?
You can ask
express
questions. You can say, well, here's another point of view. And when you touch somebody's hot button, whatever it happens to be, and the tempers go up, et cetera, it's extremely difficult to make it a calm, deliberative kind of discussion. But that would be nice.
You know,
Yeah, but passions get in the way sometimes,
yeah,
is what
yeah.
you're saying, Dave.
I'm going to take the organizational point of view. This is an organization where we have freedom to talk about things. It may be one of the last safe spaces in a lot of ways where you can do this and have civil discussions. If you're going to set a climate where that occurs, voices do have to be welcome, all voices, but you have to acknowledge that there are certain voices traditionally that have not had any platform. And when you come, you're a person of color, you come to a university that's 85% white, it's not a culture necessarily that you're going to be immediately comfortable in. And it's our job as the majority look on campus and culture on campus to say, what can we do to make this a better process? And that is accepting. Whereas if you say you don't exist because you're not like me, that's not accepting. And for me, it's that clear.
We could go on all
But I think we as
afternoon, of
teachers, though, we
course.
want to be accepting.
Oh, yeah,
and
of course
should
we
be-
do.
and-
Of course we do.
And open in terms
and,
of
Yeah.
foment discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to close the show this week, Dr. Spiceland has a fun fact for us about the hike.
I do. If you can roll, there we go. The railroad that ran from Johnson City to Boone, a lot of people don't realize we actually had a railroad back in the late 1800s until the 1940s when a hurricane knocked it out. So we talk about the Tweetsie. We use the term Tweetsie, but actually the term is a trademark term for the Tweetsie Railroad in between Boone and Blowing Rock. So if you ever use that term, you've got to talk about, in fact, and here's a mouthful, East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad. But actually from Cranberry to here, it was the Linville River, the Linville River Railway. And they were the same railroad, you know. But that's all the research I've done on the Tweetsie, and that's about all I can pull out right now. So.
History and law wrapped up together. That's our time on The Academics. I'm Paul Gates. We hope you'll join us next week.